On May 6, 1937, the German passenger airship LZ-129 Hindenburg, the pride of Nazi Germany's aviation, embarked on a transatlantic flight from Frankfurt to Lakehurst, New Jersey. Aboard were 97 passengers and 12 crew members, who had set out on what was supposed to be a routine voyage across the Atlantic Ocean. But shortly after 6:25 p.m., as the airship approached the mooring mast at Lakehurst Naval Air Station for what should have been a routine docking procedure, the starboard tail fin of the Hindenburg caught fire. Within seconds, the entire ship was engulfed in flames and 36 people were dead. For more than 30 years, airships had dominated passenger travel across the Atlantic. They were leisurely, scenic, and far cheaper than any other method available at the time. But that all changed in an instant when the world watched in disbelief as one of the greatest engineering marvels of the modern age burned to the ground. So how did this happen, and how did it bring an abrupt end to the airship era? To answer that question, let's go back to the beginning of the story. The Zeppelin NT, as it was originally called, was designed by the German firm of Count Ferdinand von Zeppelin and built by the German Airship Company. It was the largest of 6 rigid airships built for Germany during the First World War. However, although impressive for their time, they were too expensive to operate and ultimately proved to be militarily useless. And so the war ended before they could ever be deployed. As a result, following the armistice, production of the Zeppelins was halted and they were put into storage. Then, in 1923, as the German economy struggled to recover from the devastation of the war, the government decided to sell the airships at auction. Count von Zeppelin desperately didn't want this to happen, so he put together a plan to purchase them himself and then lease them back to the government. If he could convince potential buyers that the ships weren't worth purchasing, he figured he would stand a good chance of buying them all back at a very low price. One of the most likely bidders was the British Air Ministry, which had been impressed by the capabilities of the airships during the war. Von Zeppelin wanted to convince them not to buy the airships, but rather to spend their money on more conventional aircraft. He reasoned that these were slower and more vulnerable to attacks from fighters. The British Air Ministry agreed with his assessment and decided not to bid. Then von Zeppelin went to work on the French, the Italians, and the Americans, all of whom also decided not to purchase the ships. As a result, he was able to buy back all 6 of the airships for a fraction of what they were worth. He then founded the Deutsche Zeppelin Reederei Company to operate a transatlantic passenger service. However, the ships needed to be modernized first. Each of them had sleeping quarters for up to 40 soldiers, so their interiors had to be completely gutted and redesigned to accommodate passengers. They also needed new engines, which von Zeppelin purchased from the French company Hispano-Suiza. Then he turned his attention to the US government in an attempt to secure permission to fly his airships between Germany and America. In 1928, President Calvin Coolidge gave his approval and the first commercial flight of the Hindenburg's successor. The LZ-127 Graf Zeppelin took place on October 10, 1928, with its maximum capacity of 125 passengers. The airship offered unprecedented luxury and comfort compared to any other form of transportation available at the time. Passengers were able to walk around freely instead of being cramped into small seats like on trains or boats. And the large windows provided unparalleled views of the passing landscape. In fact, the LZ-127 Graf Zeppelin would go on to complete a total of 158 round trips across the Atlantic over the next 8 years without a single accident. This helped to cement the future of the airship as the preferred method for crossing the Atlantic. However, in 1933, Adolf Hitler came to power in Germany and immediately began investing heavily in the country's airship program. The idea was that if war were to break out again, the Germans would need a way to quickly transport troops and supplies across long distances. As a result, 3 new passenger airships were ordered. One was named the LZ-129 Hindenburg after President Paul von Hindenburg. Another was named the LZ-120 Hindenburg's successor, while the third was named the LZ-121. Unlike the Graf Zeppelin, which had been made mostly of aluminum, The new ships were constructed almost entirely of duralumin, a lightweight yet incredibly strong metal alloy. This allowed them to carry more cargo while reducing weight and increasing speed. But the downside was that duralumin is highly flammable. This was a serious issue because both hydrogen and airship fuel were extremely volatile. But it was ignored by those designing the airship in favor of speed and efficiency. Another crucial difference between the newer and older airships was the type of gas used to keep them afloat. Historically, passenger airships had used helium, which is non-flammable. However, by the 1930s, the United States had stopped exporting helium. And since Germany didn't have any reserves of their own, they were forced to use hydrogen, which was both flammable and explosive. To reduce the risk of explosions, the flammable parts of the airship were separated from the hydrogen gas by a wall of corrugated sheet metal. But even so, leaks were common. By 1936, the Hindenburg had made 17 round trips across the Atlantic without incident. But that same year, a minor leak developed in the hydrogen compartment of the airship. While it wasn't serious enough to cause major concern, it did prompt the crew to inspect the area from which the leak was coming. Because they couldn't find the source, they simply sealed off the affected compartment and continued on their route. Then in 1937, the Hindenburg underwent its first ever scheduled maintenance in Lakehurst, New Jersey. While there, technicians inspected the exterior of the airship and found several small tears in the fabric. Covering the hydrogen cells, because of the risk involved, they recommended that the airships not be filled with hydrogen until the fabric had been patched. However, the Nazi Party was eager to show the world the superiority of German technology. And besides, airships were known to be very safe, so they probably assumed the risk was minimal. On April 26, the Hindenburg was refilled with hydrogen and began its return trip to Frankfurt. Then on May 6, as the airship approached its mooring mast at Lakehurst, witnesses on the ground saw a bright flash followed by a small explosion. Everyone assumed it was fireworks, but just seconds later, a second explosion rocked the airship as flames erupted from the tail fin. A third explosion followed closely behind, and soon the entire rear of the Hindenburg was engulfed in flames. Airships are known for their stability, so when the fire broke out, many assumed the damage could be contained. But within seconds, the fire spread to the highly flammable duralumin body of the ship, causing the entire thing to burst into flames. Fortunately, the airship had been slightly off course, which kept it away from the highly populated mooring area. If it had struck the ground at full force, it's likely that many more people would have been killed. Still, 13 crew members and 23 of the 97 passengers died in the disaster. Some jumped from the burning ship in terror, while others perished inside the flaming wreckage. By 7:10 p.m., only 20 minutes after the first explosion, the Hindenburg was completely destroyed. An investigation was launched to determine the cause of the fire, but no definitive conclusion was ever reached. Most experts agree that a static spark ignited hydrogen gas that had been leaking from the airship's hull, but others argue that sabotage was to blame. Regardless of the cause, what was certain was that the Hindenburg disaster had effectively put an end to the airship era. Passenger travel by airship had become less popular even before the disaster, due to the emergence of commercial airplanes. But that wouldn't have mattered if not for the catastrophic loss of life and damage to property. In the aftermath of the disaster, public confidence in light-of-the-air travel plummeted, and no new passenger airships were built after 1937. In fact, the technology was essentially abandoned altogether. All of the remaining passenger airships were scrapped, and the focus shifted to building military aircraft. This was unfortunate because airships had actually been well suited for military applications. Not only could they transport large amounts of troops and supplies, but they could stay airborne for extended periods of time, making them ideal for surveillance missions. Unfortunately, their usefulness went unrecognized, and airships remained out of the public eye until they were dusted off and used in the Vietnam War. Though today they are mostly associated with the Nazis, The Hindenburg was actually built 15 years before Hitler came to power. And in reality, it was just one of many airships that met a fiery demise. Over the next few decades, more than 100 airships would be lost to disasters caused by everything from engine failures to pilot error to sabotage. Even the USS Akron, a military airship built by the US Navy to rival the Hindenburg, suffered the same fate when it caught fire and crashed near the coast of New Jersey in 1933. These disasters ultimately led to the development of safer and more reliable forms of transportation, allowing us to marvel at the enormous passenger jets that soar through the skies today. Still, we couldn't help but wonder what would have happened if the Hindenburg had burst into flames that fateful night in 1937. Would the airship era have lasted another 30 years, or perhaps even longer? We'll never know the answer to that question. But what we do know is that if you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out one of our other videos about one of history's most mysterious disasters. And don't forget, like and subscribe to the channel. Stay safe.